But I think some of it's just changing. Like, for instance, there are people who are upset with my R word take, like Boblax over here.
I'm not really upset. I was
I
just
don't know.
joking.
Some of my audience were like, "You're being performative. You don't really care. Like, you've become what you want to destroy." Because I call out performative activists all the time. Thing is, it's not
Right.
performative. It's one of those things where I'm like, this is bizarrely people are missing this context. I don't know how. I met people with intellectual disabilities, like that are I don't want to say low functioning. I want to say high support. I'm trying to be more better in my language. But because my wife works with people with intellectual disabilities, it's her job. So like I used to, not to make myself look like an idiot or an asshole, I used to like have no value. I used to not even really see people with like Down syndrome or like low functioning autistic people as people. Like I just didn't care about them. But then
Wow.
but I know that's shitty. Frankly, I think a lot of people feel that way. Like it's not like I'd go around there and say, "I hope you die." I just didn't care to like look in their direction or anything. I think a lot of people are
Yeah.
like that. They just won't admit it.
Yeah,
And then
I agree.
yeah, and then I met them. And I'm like, wow, like what a fucking idiot I was. And like I talked to
see-
these people. They're very intelligent. It's like it's obviously different, but like
Nobody believes me when I say this, but like pretty much like all my friends growing up were autistic. You know what I mean? Like I just related to them more. Like a lot of them just didn't really give a fuck about like
Yeah.
social boundaries. They were chill. They were not reserved. They were dope and stuff. So they were just the people that I just related to more in school.
yeah,
Speaking
it
of
takes a little
the-
bit of like so that's like for me that was like me growing up. Like okay, I learned that people with intellectual disabilities are people. And then it's like
Oh my
okay,
God.
I don't think that we should use this word. After listening to people again, high fuck, I'm trying to figure out the word. Effectively, for
High
lack of a better term,
support.
like low functioning people, especially people with Down syndrome, people with like autism, that like it's very impactful in their life that need like disability
'cause
services.
there's two types of autism. There's high functioning and low functioning. Low functioning is when you're like non-verbal and stuff.
Yeah,
High
I
functioning is
think
when
I'm trying to say like high
Like-
support and like
Yeah,
low support.
hi-
I'm trying to
yeah, high
but
support, high because you
Yeah,
can need
yeah.
a lot of support and be high functioning. Like for example, Christian is high functioning.
yeah,
but he
Christian
needs a
needed
lot of
more.
support.
Christian needed more
But he
support.
needs a lot.
Well,
he needs a lot, or
she
needs a lot of
needs a
support.
lot of support. Okay.
Yeah, that was a mistake on my part.
I'm just-
genuinely. But speaking of this combo, can you look at my tweet and tell me what you think of it?
Neurotypicals turned the R slur. I'm of course
Into a slur.
into a slur so that they can stop saying it and feel like good people for helping out the neurodivergent community. All you guys have to do is treat us like intellectual equals and stop pretending like you're smarter than us. Not how hard, bro. So I saw this and I debated on the comment thing, but I was like, I'm not gonna worry about it. I don't think that neurotypical people turned the R slur into a slur. I think that it always has been a slur, and people are starting to actually listen to people with intellectual disabilities now. That's like my biggest contestment to that. And for me,
Ooh.
my argument for saying that, like, because somebody said, I don't know, maybe I'm associating this too much, but somebody said like it was performative. Like what I'm saying is performative. It doesn't do anything for people with intellectual disabilities to disavow that word. But I would disagree because I think that they're like the same thing with any other slur. When there's a high usage of that particular slur, it creates an environment where people that would identify with it wouldn't feel comfortable. So if everybody was throwing on the N-word with a hard R on Twitch, I think that there would be less black creators because they would feel like they weren't welcome in the space. I think that's something similar to the R slur for people with like intellectual disabilities. So that's how I feel
fair.
about the advocation of it, So like
That's
that's
fair,
that's my
but
argument for it,
I feel like both their statements are true, but I was definitely hyperbolic in that tweet, and I was.
You're trying to be extra. I
Trying
know
to be
I know you
hyperbolic.
said that because of my
The
conversation.
tweet comes off as a joke to me, but I don't know. You're actually
It's
arguing
like
it.
it's like half a joke.
It comes
Like,
off like
Okay.
you're throwing your
mean-
hat. It sounds like you wanted me to come on the stream today.
I don't think neurotypicals turn. I do think a lot of neurotypical people think, or they're being performative with it. Like they're not going to use the word retard, but they still continue to think that neurodivergent people are less.
Oh,
than.
probably, sure.
Just like you were saying, Papa Gut, where you used to think that.
Oh
Which I
yeah,
don't
for
blame
sure.
you for. A lot of people do think that, but so I don't think you're one of those people. But I think a lot of people are just like, okay, I'm gonna stop using the R slur, and then that's enough. And I don't think. I feel like that's such a minor thing. Now, yes, if
I know what
there's-
you're talking. It's like the people who was like who say Black Lives Matter, but they have like they're very uncomfortable around black people. Like that's what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like that. Stopping to use the R slur is a good step in the right direction because there are like neurotypical people or neurodivergent people who were called that like a lot
Man,
for their disability.
Look, I hear
and
all
it's
what you're
real
saying,
bad,
but I'm saying as a certified gamer, man, that's a hard pill for me to
all
swallow.
Hey,
I'm
listen,
saying is that you're
it's
talking over a fellow neurodivergent.
Oh,
It
that's
proves
true.
The point that you don't think I'm no, I'm just kidding.
I think that it's one of those things where like when I had the conversation, I have no expectation of people to agree with me. But once I said it, now everybody's like, people are talking about it. And so like it's not about today, it's about like what happens like next year. All of a sudden, people are a little
Okay.
less comfortable saying it. I'm doing my job.
What do you think of my take? What if
What's
I
that?
don't want to make the world a better place? And
I mean, you do.
What if I'm entirely invested in my own self-interest?
Hey, you do you. You know, you do. I'm just doing the best I can to advocate in the best way possible. Yeah.
You're saying that you're trying to eliminate the R slur because you don't want to be like ignorantly bigoted towards people with disabilities, and I agree that that is what should be eliminated, because a lot of the any like bigotry towards disabled people usually isn't like intentional or malicious. It's just out of ignorance. But I feel like eliminating the R slur is a distraction from solving that ignorance rather than a step towards solving it, because people are like, oh, we just won't call them the slur, and then they're like, that's it. Now I'm pro, neurodivergent, and don't actually bother to look into what the mental differences are and try to understand it more. They're just like, okay, I've done my job. I'm done saying the R slur.
Sure, like
GG.
you're saying, like, yeah, they got their virtuous when they tune out that conversation. I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
But the thing is like, so like, there's gonna be the people who actually care and the people who don't necessarily. Like, there's gonna be people who like actually care to educate themselves, and then there's gonna be the people that are like, oh, I think I'm doing the right thing, and then they don't really care. They tune out afterwards.
Yeah.
I feel like that's gonna happen regardless. But if you can get more people that are, we'll say, neuroatypical in the community, and it's because you reduce the usage of the R slur, I think that would give them a better chance to advocate for themselves, or give them like a position to be able to like say, like, hey, we exist, like, you know, I'm a human being. Because that's what did it for me, is like just talking to people with intellectual disabilities. Like, that's what did it for me. And I feel like that's one of those things, like, yeah, some people are going to take it and be like,
usually
oh,
being around people.
yeah,
will
they need to be
soften you up to
humanized.
them.
It's like one of the first, like, hey, don't be mean to them. And then it's like, okay, now they'll exist more. And so now they'll become more like human to you because you see them. And my wife added, and she said that saying that they don't like the word and that it hurts their feelings personifies them. So I think she's just trying to say it makes them more human, I guess. You know, she should start her own fucking.
But some neurodivergent people like using that word and don't use it, and don't in their minds associate it with being targeted towards them, but rather just a general insult for someone, like calling someone an idiot, calling them dumb, calling them silly. That's how I see the word. If someone else sees it a different way, obviously I'm going to respect that and not say that around them and stuff. But that's personally how I see the word, and most of my neurodivergent peers also have that opinion. Although I know also neurodivergent people who don't like that word.
Well,
use it around them. But
what I would say to that is, like, it was I when I was talking to Stardust, I tried to like compare this. It's like, it's one of those things where, let's say the N word was used more. Like, let's say we didn't ban that on Twitch. I would argue that a lot more people would be using that word, and I would also argue that a lot of them wouldn't be necessarily using it to be racist. Like, I can see a group of white people getting together saying the N-word to each other because they think it's funny. Because I used to do that when I was like 20 years old. We would play video games and we would call each other the N-word. It wasn't right, and we weren't being racist when we used the word. It was just a really shocking, edgy word that made us laugh, and that's not appropriate. But what happens there is, like, now, when people are like, yeah, but that has racist implications there, obviously. You're like, yeah, but I don't care about that. I don't see the racism in it. It doesn't really matter to me. And so now you're not really valuing the people who find that to be offensive. And then just the usage of that makes them feel like, okay, this isn't a space for me. Because even if you're not trying to be racist, like, it makes it uncomfortable for my existence, kind of a thing. You know, that's how I look at it. Yeah.
The N-word has always been like super rooted in racism and stuff like that.
Well, I think the R slur was as well.
Like for neurodivergent people?
Yeah, it was originally a medical diagnosis, yeah?
Yeah, but most people have always used it as like a general insult. Like, I don't think there's ever been a time in history where people are just like you're acting dumb and people just call you an N-word and no one thinks.
Well, no. But like when we look at the historical context of the R slur, it used to be a medical diagnosis that comes from like the Latin word slow.
A lot of words used to mean a lot of things.
No, I know, but this word,
bundle of sticks.
But this word like still means that thing, right? And I think that the historical implication of
I
a bundle.
think-
Well, hold on. I think the historical implication of like a bundle of twigs was like that you would light them on fire, and that's why that slur is also bad from a historical context. Like that's the thing is like the R slur. They created a medical diagnosis that meant the word slow, and then people would call people that got diagnosed as such. They would treat them as less than people, and that's why they
But-
ended up changing that from a medical diagnosis because it was so offensive.
In the 2000s, most usage of the R word was used just to call people generally dumb. If you look at movies from the 2000s, which do have that word in it, it's usually just to call people you're acting dumb, not to,
Yeah,
like,
but that
call out
doesn't.
someone.
No, but like that's what we were saying before, right? We were just talking about how, like, yeah, I don't think people use the R slur in every case to be like, oh, I'm going to intentionally like antagonize a person
Yeah,
with
but the
intellectual disabilities.
but you're comparing it to the N word, and the N word has always had racist connotation.
Yeah, but the R
Like, if
slur. No,
someone,
no, no.
if someone said the N word in a 2000s movie, it's because they're black. If someone says the R slur in a 2000s movie, it's
So
not, it's just because they're acting silly, not because
the
they're
reason
mentally
why
disabled.
the reason like okay the reason why it's difficult to in some instances compare these two is because like we have decided as a society that the n-word should be disavowed because it's racist, and a big part of my argument is the reason that we haven't decided to disavow the R slur is because people don't really care about people with intellectual disabilities. Like I think that that's a reason.
I disagree.
I think for the most part even society isn't there yet. We're just now getting into the mental health conversations where we're normalizing people with intellectual disabilities, and that's why we're seeing more shows about
I
like
agree.
autistic people dating or people with autism dating. And stuff.
I agree with that portion of it.
Yeah.
But I don't agree that people stop or were using the R word because they didn't care about people with intellectual
No, I
disabilities.
think. Do you think that most people care about people with intellectual disabilities and like an actual?
No.
Well, so then you kind of agree with me, right? That's
But
the thing.
but I think people who use the R word weren't specifically thinking about people.
No,
with
but that's exactly my point, and that's exactly the problem, right? So like the reason we won't use like the N word is because when we use it, even if we didn't use it to be racist, it was because we're always thinking about like, oh, it's like a black person would find this offensive. When it comes to the R slur, I don't think people care enough to think like, oh, somebody with an intellectual disability might find this offensive, and that's where it comes from, like
the thing.
that ignorance when it comes to that.
In the 2000s, I feel like the R word was detached mostly from people with intellectual disabilities, and then later on, people connected it, and then it became a slur. With the N word, it's always been connected. The N-word has always been connected with black people.
I don't think that that's like necessarily true. And again, I think that the disconnection would come from the fact that people don't really have people with intellectual disabilities in their mind, and that there is no robust space for people with intellectual disabilities to even advocate for themselves. Like there's no media attention. Nobody really listens to the people with intellectual disabilities. Nobody really listens to the parents. Even the parents tend to think less of their own kids. Like there isn't.
Yeah.
There's not like the same
but...
as like social my argument is that if there was a similar social advocation, we wouldn't be seeing this problem. But because society just looks at people like with Down syndrome as just less than fundamentally, they don't really care necessarily about their feelings.
Yeah, but I don't feel like that's like tied to the
I think
R-word,
it's tied to it in the way where like they don't really care. They're not even thinking about it. Because okay, so it's one of those things where they don't see people with Down syndrome as human in like a sense, so they don't really think like, what if somebody found this offensive? Whereas like you won't to the N word because like, what if a black person found this offensive? We think black people are people in society. Society doesn't want to admit it, but for the most part, we don't really think that people with Down syndrome are people, and that's why we don't really care in general.
But also people who do care about people with those disabilities in the 2000s, they wouldn't think about people with those disabilities getting offended by the R word because the R word wasn't meant to refer to them. It was just meant to refer to people who are being stupid in general.
It was always like, that's where it always came from. Like I remember being like 10, 11, 12 years old. I specifically remember a moment where like my middle school gym teacher yelled at us for saying the R slur. Like it was never front and center in our minds. That's why we don't think of it in a way where nobody ever thought of it like that. But they like people with intellectual disabilities like historically always have because of like where it comes from. We just didn't assign that value to it. But again, it's like that lack of sensitivity to the individuals who would be targeted by that slur. That's where it comes from. It's just the lack of like caring about those people.
Well, I know many people in my life who care a lot about people with intellectual disabilities and people with intellectual disabilities who love the R word and don't think it should be a slur and don't think it is a slur.
Well, I would say that it is a slur. I don't know. I was like, because in the online commentary space, like it's not, but like The general society
consider,
had.
like,
I mean,
if you
dude,
consider like the C word, the white one, a slur, I think you have to consider like just
Cracker?
because a word's a slur doesn't mean that it carries like the weight that other slurs carry, right? Like not just like not all. You know what I mean? Like at least socially.
Well, yeah.
Speaking
Socially
today, not
speaking,
all
nobody like
slurs
the
are
R
the
slur
same.
does not carry the same weight as like most other slurs, and I would argue
Yeah,
part of
so
it's
it can
because
be a
of
slur.
yeah.
It can just be not that bad of a word to say at the same time. You know what I
I
mean?
think,
Like,
well, that's the thing is like society hasn't valued it as like a bad word, and that's kind of like
he-
the advocation
he-
point for me. You know?
Here's my issue with it.
Yeah.
And this is gonna get a little more personal. But my
Okay.
whole life, obviously, I've grown up autistic, and
Mhm.
a lot of people knew I was autistic. My parents would tell their parents, which would tell their kids. The schools knew I was autistic. So no matter how I acted, whether I acted autistic or didn't act autistic, they would know. And I got discriminated a lot because of that. But I was never discriminated through people calling me the R slur. It was always a bunch of different things, right?
Mhm.
So if we're focusing on the R slur and saying, oh, don't discriminate against neurodivergent people with the R slur, you're ignoring all the many other ways that people discriminate against autistic people. Biggest example, acting like they're 5 years younger than they are, going up to an autistic teen at 14 and kneeling down and being like, oh, you okay, buddy? And acting like they're fucking 7 years old, right? And a bunch of other things.
Being condescending to them. Yeah.
And the R word, like, I've been discriminated my whole life because of my autism in many ways, growing up in childhood, less in adulthood. In the last like 5 to 7 years, I wouldn't say I would have been discriminated at all because of my autism. But prior to that, definitely. And I've never been called the R slur in a derogatory way. It was always just if I was doing something stupid, and then someone would also call someone who isn't autistic an R slur for doing something equally as stupid. So I just think that that word distracts from the so many other ways that autistic people and other neurodivergent people are discriminated against. People are like, "Oh, I'm not saying the R slur, so now I'm good." But then they still treat them like they're 5 years younger or like they're inferior or whatever. Focus on solving those discriminations instead of something so insignificant as the R word.
Right. So then, like, okay, because we're gonna keep it to this sphere, because obviously we're having a conversation about like a social, like the I guess like the internet sphere. How do you get people to talk about those topics unless you create comfortable environments for people to be able to advocate for themselves, so that the other people will realize that they're humans? That's my whole argument. Is like if we create the space by reducing the word, and I'm not sitting here saying don't ever use the word. I'm just saying that I think it's a bad word, and it's creating an environment that people don't want to exist. A lot of people who find it offensive wouldn't want to exist in to advocate for themselves because of it. Because like, how do you
don't want to exist in a world because everyone treats them like a child.
No, I know.
The word is completely irrelevant.
No, I don't think it's complete. I don't, but I disagree. Like if you talk to a lot of people, and I know that you have an intellectual disability, but if you talk to a lot of other people, especially like people like that are like high support individuals, almost unanimously, all of them hate that word and don't like it when it's used. Like I referenced a Jubilee video about it too, because there's a bunch of people with Down syndrome that are like, yeah, we really don't like the word at all. Like a lot of people don't like it, and that's the whole thing.
I mean, I don't mean to invalidate you, but if we're going by numbers, like I think I know more intellectually disabled people than you.
I mean, that's not
this
generally.
okay, hold on. This argument just sounds like you guys are debating about who's like the bigger expert here. Or something,
well, no,
right?
it's not about who's the bigger expert. It's like not everybody that has an intellectual disability obviously is going to think the same.
Well,
And
like,
it's
I
just-
don't think there's
I've acknowledged
anything
that. I've
productive in
acknowledged
saying
that
so
that,
many
like,
times.
oh, well, I'm autistic. Well, I know more autistic people. It's like,
Well, I'm not
regardless
making
of-
that point.
Well, okay.
Well,
I guess more the ballpark. I'm just saying it's like
you said,
doesn't-
oh, my people with intellectual disabilities I know all
you guys are both
unanimously
arguing
don't like the
anecdotal
R word. It's
experiences.
like,
though.
Well, yeah,
are you
people-
invalidating the intellectual disability people that I know that do. Are
No,
okay with
I'm
the
not-
R slur?
I'm not-
Like, are
I'm
you
not-
saying I don't have enough?
No, what I'm
it's like-
no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that like there's a lot of people who have absolutely no representation. Those tend to be people that are inside the system that nobody really values enough to actually have a conversation with them, and those are the people that generally aren't. Those are the people that I know, right? Like and I'm not trying to be a dick, but that's all I'm trying to say. And like again, my wife is like a behavioral specialist, so I go to parties with a lot of people, and I'm not trying to like throw that out there. So like I'm just listening to them. Like that's really what it's coming from.
Yeah,
you know?
and I do value your experience with them because maybe like mine are more like peers. You know, they're people I grew up with and know, so I have more peer intellectual disability friends or neurodivergent friends, but you're looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah,
and I do know for a fact that there are a lot of people with neurodivergencies that don't like the R slur, and I don't say it around them and stuff like that. But I think even they would agree that the bigger issue is people discriminating against them for, you know, treating them like they're younger, treating them like they're stupider.
Yeah,
like the
I agree
R
with
slur
that.
is like on the bottom of the list.
Well,
right?
that's the thing. It's like I agree with that. I wouldn't say the R slur is at the bottom of the list. I'd say it's the most surface level thing on the list, right? Like it's the most shallow thing. Would you agree with that?
Not really.
What do you know?
Isn't it easier to treat someone like a peer than to stop using a word? Just
No,
treat
okay, so
just treat neurodivergent people like you treat anyone else.
yeah,
Like,
no,
it's not hard. That's surface level. That should be baseline. That's surface level.
No, right. So like what I'm arguing here is that again, like what I'm saying is that if we got that word out of our vernacular, especially in the online sphere, because like it's pretty much out of everybody else's, you know, at least publicly, you know, it's out of their you know, word usage. That it could create an environment for people with intellectual disabilities to feel more comfortable existing in the sphere, which means that there's more people and there's more humanization of those people as other people are like forced to interact with them. And that people don't give a shit about people they don't know. They're outside their sphere. And so what I'm saying is if we create a more comfortable sphere for them, for people with intellectual disabilities, and what the biggest way would be to not use that word, that would be the best first step. That's my entire argument.
Yeah, but so if like someone who has the R word in their vocabulary and they're neurotypical, and they're like that they have a neurodivergent friend around and they respect them or whatever, and they're about to say the word and they stop because there's a neurodivergent friend by them, that makes the neurodivergent person feel different and feel like they're being treated differently because they're neurodivergent and the neurotypical
person I get that.
Is constantly thinking in their head how they're different, and that's bad. If we just start using the R word again as a general insult for everyone, then everyone's equal and they're not like
but like what we're
singled out.
We're arguing two different things right now though, right? So I'm talking about a public sphere. What you're saying is like, hey, if you're in a friend group and like you look at one of your friends who may have
someone like let's say like you're in it's a new person coming into the
No, I know that, but like well, that's what I'm talking about. Like if I would say you shouldn't be comfortable using the word at all. So like in your case, it's like, oh, we're comfortable using the word in general, but we're not going to use it because of so and so. Like in a private setting, like do your thing. If that's part of your group culture, and like, yeah, I get that. But in a public setting, you shouldn't even be thinking to go to that word. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, it's just like saying the R slur is just like another way of like pointing out that not using the R slur because there's a neurodivergent person there just reinforces the idea that neurotypical people see neurodivergent people differently, and they're using that word.
Would you assign that same thing to like the N word though? Like if I was using it comfortable with people, but then I had a black friend there, would you think that I was being like somehow racist to my black friend because I wasn't like using that word? You know,
if that word wasn't attached to black people,
but the R slur is. But here's the thing: is like the R slur is. I think that it is attached to people. It still is attached to people. Again, like this is like it's almost like a fringe. Like you're from like an edgier sphere where it's more okay, and that's totally fine. I'm just saying like that word is still very much attached to people with intellectual disabilities.
Well, I'm not talking about internet. I'm going based on like experience.
Well, yeah, in society,
experience.
Yeah, but like in society, it's still very much attached to it. Like in general, like I know that there are spheres where it's not.
But it wasn't really in the 2000s. I don't think.
I think so. Yeah, no, it always really has been.
I was a kid then, so.
No, I know. Well, I was older, I guess. But like it's always been attached to it. It's just that again, like society hasn't been like super like, oh my god, it's so bad, because like there was a difference. Like again with other slurs, the groups that were advocating were more generally respected. Like that's the whole point that I'm making.
I understand your argument.
Yeah.
I just don't know if I fully agree with it 100%.
Okay. That's fair.
But obviously, I agree with most of what you said, like 90% pretty much.
There you go. Well, also
you do acknowledge. I think you have a lot of experience with neurodivergent people, and I do think you do genuinely acknowledge the issue. It's just that a lot of people who are saying don't use the R slur or whatever aren't in your position. I think they're using it as like a scapegoat kind of.
Oh yeah, I agree with that too. I I think that there's a lot of people who do good things, but they don't really care for the reason why. They just want to seem like good people. I agree with that. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. I'm not mad at you like defending the R slur or whatever.
No, I don't
just
think that
it's an
you are.
interesting Convo.
No,
I like this convo.
I didn't take it personally at all. Don't even worry about it.
I like talking about this stuff because another part of it is like people are ignorant because people don't want to talk about it, right? Like even with someone like who I know accepts me and everything, like Nicholas Dior or whatever, or even Augie or whatever. Like if I were on a stream with them and I were to start talking like in depth about this stuff, they would feel like a little uncomfortable because they wouldn't know what to say or how to approach it or whatever, and that's because of lack of knowledge around the subject. Maybe Augie a little less so.
Are you saying that Nicholas Diorio and Augie don't care about people with intellectual disabilities? Is that the hot take?
No. I'm saying that they don't know much about it, so when the conversation comes up, they don't know how to like approach it. Not as much Augie, maybe like just people in general. Maybe I shouldn't have named specific names, but just
I was just joking around. I know what
general.
you're saying. Like it's one of those things
Yeah.
where it's like, how do you even really begin to educate yourself on a topic like that? Yeah, no, I get that. Again, like I was in their shoes like 3 years ago, and even then, because like I've been with my wife for like 3 or 4 years now, it wasn't like an instantaneous thing where I'm like, oh my god, like I understand. Like it takes like a long time, bro. It takes meeting people. Like to really be like, what the fuck?
It's crazy. It's gonna take so long to undo it, and it's like,
oh yeah,
literally when growing up, it feels like I'm waiting my turn because first people need to accept different races, then they need to accept different genders and transgender. Oh no, then gay, then transgender, and then will come. So I'm literally just waiting.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I'm saying. That it's usually like
we're waiting in line.
You guys are usually at the back, or people with intellectual disabilities are usually at the back of the line because they don't really get their fair shake. You know?
Yeah.
So
100%. It's like, here's an example of it. It's like a couple of years ago, I created a second channel to discuss this type of stuff called Truly Autistic. And people, because of the name of the channel, and I did this intentionally because I want to destigmatize it over time. But with the name of the channel, people thought it was a joke at first. People are laughing about it, memeing about it.
See, that's what they
which makes it, which shouldn't be a thing just because they hear Truly Autistic, because they just think the word.
Well, that's basically
like a joke.
Yeah, that's like another, almost like a slur now. It's like calling somebody autistic. It's like, oh, aren't you autistic?
Yeah, I think calling someone autistic in to mean that they're acting stupid in a negative way is infinitely worse than the R slur. I think that's way worse than the R.
You could probably have a good, strong argument on that. I haven't explored that thought, so I can't even like comment on it. Like I used to
and
like.
I don't mind that people do it. Honestly, like me personally, I don't mind, but I think it's way more offensive.
You just have to say
like you're implying that if you use it as a general insult, you're implying all autistic people are dumb. It's like when you used gay as an insult back in the day, right? You're thinking, oh, gay is bad.
Yeah,
I'm
that's what it is.
using the word gay as an insult. Autistic is bad. I'm using the word as an insult. I think that's way worse than saying the R slur.
Well, I think the R slur is much worse than gay. I don't know if that's what you're.
Oh no, then
okay.
No, I'm saying.
Oh
autistic.
yeah, I could see that argument. Yeah, I could see that. Again, like I haven't explored it, but I could see
maybe
why
even gay. But the issue with me and the R slur, and it might change over time, is like when I think the R slur, disabled people aren't connected to the R slur at all in my mind. It's the same as idiot, silly, dumb.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the F slur is directly connected to gay people, and the N word is directly connected to black people in my head. But the R slur isn't directly connected to people with disabilities in my head. So that's why.
I understand where you're coming from. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, but that's a personal thing. Maybe it will connect in the future. I don't know. But
maybe we'll stop. Maybe we'll stop using the word in the future. Maybe we'll see how it goes. You know.
I don't know. I just feel like next people are gonna start saying don't say idiot because it has a history of people disabled. Because idiot has that history too.
Yeah, no.
Dumb has that history too. Are we gonna say the D word or the I slur stuff?
I think that there's something like unique about the R slur that has kept up with people. Like nobody that I've heard of really cares about the word dumb or cares about the word stupid. Even people with intellectual disabilities. It's like specifically that word. Like there's probably a bunch of other racial slurs that you could call somebody. Even for like black people, and there are that have like slowly kind of died out. People don't really necessarily care about them as much. There's something specific about that word. Like people don't really get it. And then maybe you're right. Once they got rid of the R slur, maybe dumb would be next. I don't really see it happening. Like I think the R slur is like is particular. I think it's very specific. I think it's very particular, and clearly there's a lot of people that have like
I feel like
the much more energy for that word than with the other words.
it's like the first in the list, I guess, but like I feel as though people with intellectual disabilities never particularly got offended by the R word until other people said it was a slur, and then they got offended.
Yeah, I don't think that's.
I guess
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I don't think that's what it
because
was
other
so
people
much.
would have used the word idiot and dumb for them as well. I don't know. I feel like that. I'm hesitant to say that though, because that invalidates people's experience. And I've heard people say that they've been called the R word multiple times growing up, specifically from their disability. I didn't have that experience, but I know other people have. So I don't
Mhm.
want to invalidate that, but I feel like maybe other words were used towards them, like dumb or stupid or whatever. And I don't know. But
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like, that's I personally haven't like heard of it. I don't know if there's a lot of advocation for it. I don't know. I mean, like, there's something particular about the R slur. Maybe it's because the word dumb was used towards like blind and deaf people, and there's like a different dynamic because people in society don't look at people who are blind and deaf as like less than. They just look at them as like, oh, they need help in some capacity, but you don't really look down
it's
on
like
there.
unfortunate.
Yeah, there's something particular about people with intellectual disabilities that people go like, wow, that person is like dumb or stupid or like, R
Yeah.
slur, and like
Because
they're less than,
It's because other people are dumb and they can only think of mental in like a binary way where it's like you're either smarter or you're dumber, and there's no like
yeah,
they
and
just
then
see it
you
as
think of
one
them as
line.
less. Yeah.
Yeah, they just think of it as IQ, just like you're either 0 IQ or you're 300 IQ. And if you're born autistic, you just have a lower IQ. Like they
Yeah.
only think in that binary way. They don't know the differences.
Right, but if somebody's like blind, they're just like, oh, okay, and like they get through it much quicker. I think that's what it is. It's like a very much of like an uphill battle with people with intellectual disabilities on normalizing
and I
their
think
existence.
part of the reason is that of the issue is because it's labeled a disability. I feel like that labeling is damaging because when you have when you're neurodivergent,
Mhm.
you have obviously there's certain things in your mind that make it so it's harder for you to do something than a neurotypical person, but there's also advantages to where a neurodiverse person can be better than a neurotypical person. So it's just a difference, it's a mental difference. So calling it a disability puts focus on only the downsides of it and not the positive, which is why I like to say neurodivergent instead.
Yeah, like I understand the two aspects. I think like for one, there's probably environments where people that are we'll say also use neurodivergent would like thrive in, like if they learned differently or something. But it's just that there's like an incongruence with our society that it makes it difficult to like specifically isolate those like individuals and help them get that specific thing. I mean, that's always like incredibly possible. But the other thing is like when it comes to like it's one of those things where you kind of have to label it something because there needs to be some treatment, like, to change the environment. And so I think it's more the stigma attached to disability than it is that it is labeled as a disability.
But there's lots of other labels, just autism, high functioning autism.
Yeah, but like how would you
syndrome, and then for an umbrella term, neurodivergent.
Right. Well, then that would okay. So you're saying like you would advocate for changing the diagnosis to neurodivergent instead of like disability. I mean, that's fair.
Yes.
Well, see, there we go though. But now that's another R slur. Now you're creating another, and I'm actually I agree with you. But now you're creating like another R slur. All of a sudden, disability.
Yeah, but the word disabled is inherently. It means less disabled.
Yeah, and the word the R slur means like slow. It like inherently means slow. It's from the Latin language slow. Like these words come from like negative terms originally. If you look at the etymology of them.
Yeah, but we're not people aren't saying slow minded. They're saying the R word.
No, I know, but like that's what the word originally has meant, right? So like that's where it comes from. It used to mean slow, like in music. That's what they use. And then they said like, okay, let's create the diagnosis because these people are just slow, and that's like a way to be disparaging. So they created the diagnosis, and the people were like, hey, like this is shitty. I don't like this. Let's change it. And then they changed it, and then that would be the similar to the word disability. And I actually agree with you. I think that we could change that.
Okay, I get what you mean. I do get what you mean. But I think mentally disabled has been more harmful to the neurodivergent community than the R word.
Yeah, but like nowadays, maybe sure because like it's so normalized.
Even back then.
Well, back then when they had it, like when the diagnosis was like mental retardation, like I think that was much worse than.
Oh yeah, that was bad. Yeah, if you use
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like
using
they're on the
R
same.
word as a diagnosis. That is
Yeah,
bad. I don't
right,
like that.
right. So that's what I'm saying is like these, like theoretically, you're advocating like something similar. You're like, hey, let's remove disability as a diagnosis because I find it offensive fundamentally.
But the word
But
disabled is used in many other contexts. It isn't just exclusive to that.
No, I know. No. But so was that term, like the R slur. It used to mean like, well, still does even today. If you look, if you ever like do like music classes, it's one of like the symbols. It's like that's what it is. It means to slow. Like it's still used in other. That's the thing. It originally comes from meaning slow. So they made a diagnosis for like you're slow. Like that's what it means when they diagnose you with like mental R slur or R word. And that's like similar to disabled. It used to have that meaning, and then they would associate like, oh, the diagnosis is they're slow. That's what it is. Like that's the diagnosis is you're slow in the head, and that would be that's the same thing as what you're talking about with like the word disabled.
The fact, okay, let's say they're both bad, right? So the fact that people are prioritizing to eliminate the R word from their vocabulary rather than eliminate the word mentally disabled from their vocabulary, the fact that they're prioritizing the R word proves that they care. I feel like it just proves that they're so ignorant to.
But they are. But no, but that's
is actually important.
No, but you're right.
Diverse people.
So like ignorance means like a lack of understanding. Like the word inherently isn't actually rude. That's the thing, though, is that it is ignorant, but we don't have the social advocation for focusing on the word disability as well, because people with neurodivergent individuals, they don't have as much representation. But if we are able to reduce the usage of the R slur, it would create a more comfortable environment for people to be able to say like, hey, you know what? It's not just the R slur. There's also like still like here's like a systemic aspect of like disability being a diagnosis, which is like shitty historically. So like that's where it would come from.
Why don't we advocate more for that instead?
Well, I would say that you could advocate for both.
Well, you were consistently saying mentally disabled this entire conversation.
Yeah, and then after you said that, I've been using the word neurodivergent to be more sensitive.
Am I the first person to tell you about?
You're the first person to ever make that point. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, see? It's not...
That's why more people need to talk about this. That's the thing. The fact that I'm the first person that has told you that, despite, the field that your wife works in and the people you've met, is insane. That's insane.
No, right. There you go. But that, I think, contributes to my original point,
Okay. I'm not super attached to the R word where I don't I'm like, oh, don't become a slur, or whatever. I'm just expressing myself on why I think other issues are more important.
That's fair.
Right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
And I guess maybe it's a good thing that the R word's turning into a slur because it's a vessel for me to go against it and say, hey, actually, this is more important. So.
It allows you to be able to talk about it. Well, most people if you think about it, you were saying before, your friends use that word a lot. And then you also said that your friends aren't particularly educated on this topic in general. And so
I think Augie is.
Well, maybe there's maybe there's a little bit of an association with people who use the R slur freely and not being educated on the topic. Although people in general are probably just not educated on the topic, so it's
Yeah, I can't look into people's minds and know if they're saying it to reference disabled people or saying it to just call someone dumb or idiot.
Well, I was just associating.
I can't look into their mind.
I was just associating the usage of the word with like the lack of interest in caring about people. But
people
I think
also use the word while caring about neurodivergent people, like me.
I think that people just don't. I think most people just don't really care too much about people with intellectual disabilities, regardless of whether they use the R slur or not. Like honestly, I think that's really what it boils down to.
It's hard for me to wrap my head. That's hard for me to wrap my head around. Like people care more about different races and different sexualities than people with different mental disabilities or differences. Like what's the difference there? I don't. Is there like a tier list to where people care about black people first, then gay people, then mentally impaired people? Like, is that?
It's just because society. I think society finds people with neurodivergent people as uncomfortable, and they just kind of stay away from them. I think that's why there isn't so much advocacy for them. And then when you say something, it's like, who cares? Because like, who's gonna cancel you? Really? Like nobody really cares. Unfortunately, I'm not saying I support that.
It's
But, like,
crazy.
but soon it's
Crazy.
gonna get there. We're on the this is like the topic of conversation now is people talking about like their neurodivergency. Sorry, I'm not trying to
Sometimes
argue.
sometimes I wish I was just born like 20 or 30 years in the future, so I wouldn't have to deal with this shit, bro.
You'd be dealing with something else then.
I guess, yeah.
Obviously,
But it's
some other issue, like climate
like,
change.
even though a lot of people are still like transphobic and homophobic and stuff, at least they understand like what it is. Like, homophobic people know that gay people like to fuck other dudes, you know. But
I
like
guess so, yeah.
with neurodivergency, it isn't like bigotry really. It's just ignorance, widespread ignorance. Like,
I think it's just like I think fundamentally it's like the same thing. They just don't care to engage in the topic.
Yeah, like,
because they don't feel like they have to.
that's why it's hard to get like mad at people who are like discriminatory towards people with disabilities, because it's pretty much exclusively out of ignorance. Whereas with all the other groups that needed advocation in the past, it's mostly bigotry. There's ignorance as well, but it's mostly bigotry.
It's like looking at them as less than. I think it's just like historically I think it's historically they look at black people in for instance as like less than. Like subhuman. I think they're similar to people with intellectual disabilities. It's just like one is like, oh, black people are subhuman, let's kill them. The other one's like, oh, somebody neurodivergent people are like they are like children, so like let's baby them. I think that's like how it manifests. It's just been different.
Yeah, it's completely different because like if we look at like the Catholic Church or whatever, they don't they're like completely obviously against gay people most of the time. But they let neurodivergent people into their church. They have nothing. They have nothing against someone with a mental disability. So
no,
they might be ignorant to them, but they don't hate them to the point of kicking them out. Right?
Yeah, they just like they feel bad for them. Yeah, usually like unfortunately.
It's like there's a lot of discrimination towards mentally disabled people, but there's not a lot of hatred. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think it's just tuning out because they don't feel like they have to listen to those individuals. I think that's really what it comes down to.
So like I don't know how I would approach advocating for my group because it's just such a different situation than anything else.
Yeah, well, I think slowly people are starting to witness or to listen and tune in on people.
I think it's getting better.
Yeah. So it's happening more and more every day. So soon, yeah.
Some people who are just not willing to,
Yeah, those people will always be there, but eventually, like the general status quo will be like to say fuck them. Anyway, I'm gonna get out of here because I'm fucking tired, bro.
All right, good night.
Sorry, brother, but I appreciate the conversation. I think it's always fun. It's always.
I think the conversation ran its course. There's nothing it was good. Didn't want to say or whatever. It's a really good conversation. Thank you for having it with me.
Yeah, no problem, man. I appreciate it. It was pretty cool.